And I can tell you as a CEO, this is one of the things I think about the most is the value being realized by my customers because it is so critical to everything we do as customer marketers and customer advocacy professionals that we're first creating value for our customers because if we overlook that and just expect it to happen magically, it may not. It doesn't always just happen by accident. And so that's why we think of it as such an important topic for us to dive into for the customer marketing community, for the entire Customer X community. And so in doing so, I was fortunate enough to cross paths with an expert in this area a few weeks ago, and that's Marja Moore. And she has created a framework for value realization. And it's super packed with useful information that I think can help all of us. And today she's going to share some highlights of that, but I know it goes way deeper than what you're going to learn about today. But I just want to stress to people just how important this is to really prioritize whether you're directly responsible or involved in creating value that your clients experience. You need to really understand what those value drivers are that your customers should be experiencing. What are those superset of possible value outcomes? And then you need to be identifying which of your customers are achieving those. And again, I'm not going to steal any of her thunder, but let me just introduce Marja Moore. Marja, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and why this is such a big passion of yours?
Yeah, hi everybody. I'm Marja Moore. I actually kind of grew up in customer and the whole idea of what it means to give value back to a customer. And it probably started way back when I was a child and I had to think about all the things that I was doing and how I was kind of preparing myself, no matter if it was for a presentation for a teacher or doing some of my work for customers. It always made me wonder what they get out of the things we do. And so as my career progressed, I became more ingrained in technology and how that actually affects people who are buying technology products and services. I've worked at places like SAP Concur, Infoblox. I've been at Microsoft Consulting, and I've learned a lot through my career about how this really goes and how it can be built from incubation all the way through to value engineering. So I'll share a little bit of that with you today. Again, like Jeff said, there's a lot here and we're going to have to unpack it at different stages, but this is really about kind of helping everyone understand that value realization is important, even if we are seeing some shifts in organizations kind of getting away from customer success, customer marketing. And this is a really great way for us to kind of combat what we're seeing. And so I'll give you some tips and tricks today on that. And so with that, I'm going to go ahead and keep on going. So here we are talking about, let's see if these slides are going to move forward. Today, I'll go through some taxonomy. We kind of did introductions. We'll talk a little bit about understanding the challenge that we're facing in Customer X roles and why value realization is kind of at the forefront of that. We'll talk about challenges and making those into opportunities. We'll get into some strategies for success and how to leverage your customers. A quick conclusion, and then we'll go to some Q&A. So with that, let's get started. Taxonomy, I just want to level set with everybody on what you're going to hear from me throughout this presentation. I'm not going to read these to you. You can see up here, and I've highlighted the important parts of it, but really value realization happens throughout the entire journey. So you need to start at some place in order to get that done. And we'll talk about where that is when we get a little further along. Value pillars are really the bigger themes within your organization that lead to customer growth and customer outcomes. So they are the outcomes that customers are trying to reach. And those value drivers are any contributing business outcomes that go into those bigger themes. And then, of course, a business outcome. What are CEOs looking for? What are C-suites really trying to achieve with their company? And we'll talk a little bit about that as well. So why value realization? If you think about it, and I know we've all heard statistics, but specifically a 5% increase in retention, this is important, can deliver up to 95% increase in profits. So if you aren't paying attention to that retention, how much profit are you losing because you're having to either go back and sell to those customers because they didn't renew, or you're in a new sales cycle. And we all know it costs way more to get new customers than it does to retain the old ones. So that 5% increase has resounding effects on the end profit. So we need to make sure that we're not just discounting any increase in that retention. It's important. And I know we all know this statistic as well, that 80% of future revenue comes from about 20% of your existing customers. So they're going to be your big fish, the ones that can keep expanding and growing. So we need to also face the fact that those customers need more than some of the other customers, and you're going to have to pay attention to those in a different way sometimes. And then for companies that are looking to go public, companies with high retention rates tend to be evaluated 2 times more than others. So that's another thing to consider when we're talking about value realization. If you are talking about NRR, which is, again, the percentage of revenue retained from current customers, including expansion, downgrades, and cancellations, that is the metric that determines profitable growth. And so if you want to look like a profitable growth company, you need to make sure that you are achieving NRR in the right way. This statistic was really interesting to me because although it's a little bit old, 64% of technology buyers will downgrade or more, they potentially will even end some of their subscriptions before it even comes to renewal time. They already have that decision made. And with an economic downturn or perceived economic downturn, that may become more and more as we go on. So that's something to also consider as well when we're talking about retention. What are you doing before you even get to the renewal cycle to keep that customer close and make sure that they're engaged? And then, of course, value realization. This is where value realization comes in. It is the powerful leverage to help you defend your position in the marketplace and with your customers. It ensures customer retention because if you're showing them value, there's no reason for them to leave. They can prove it, it's quantifiable. And then it expands your cross-sell, upsell, and all of that are those components of profitable growth that we just talked about with NRR. So what is the challenge that everybody's facing today? There are 2 paths forward. You're either in or you're out. And if you're out, it looks like you're divesting in the roles that are customer X. You're diverting some of your money to either OpEx, headcount, or as I like to call them, short-term illusions. And what I mean by that is that if you are divesting in customer X roles, who's taking care of the customer, how much retooling, reskilling, changes in processes all have to go into that in order to get out what you're expecting. And then on top of that, is that just an illusion because it's a short-term fix to a long-term problem? And so you might see really great revenue coming in, but again, you're chasing after new customers, which cost more than going after and expanding your current customers. Or you can invest and you can really focus on value realization and customer-led growth. And this means that you're going to invest more and you're going to innovate more on your products. The experience that your customers have, the processes that you go through, the life cycle that they're experiencing. And then this really fosters that long-term success rather than thinking about short-term gains. And a lot of companies are choosing one way or another. No matter which way you're going, I think there are some tips and tricks in here. I'm going to assume that most people are trying to stay in. But if you're not, if you're in that situation, feel free to raise your hand or ask a question and I can provide some details on the other side. All right, so value realization drives the growth cycle. I think we all agree with this. We know that once they assess where they're at with a different technology, right? This is a very simplified kind of growth cycle for everybody. But basically they assess what they're going to do they purchase or not? And that's where the value realization comes in. As long as you're showing it to them, they're going to continue to purchase, continue to adopt, continue to assess, and continue to do the same thing round and round. How do you get started though? Where does this even begin for somebody? Well, if you look at the customer life cycle, it always has to start with the customer. So it has to start in the adopt stage. It really does begin with customer success. And so a lot of companies will begin their investigation, their building of this program or methodology in the customer lifecycle phase of adopt, because as we see, it goes back and impacts every different part of the life cycle. Again, this is probably not exact to everybody's life cycle, but this is a pretty good representation. So if you're taking all of your learnings from your current customers, what they value, how they value it, what it means to them in an organization, and what it means to their C-suite, you're going to be able to inform marketing of how to position it. You're going to be able to inform the sales teams about how to talk to value, how to talk to that C-level suite so that they can quickly overcome any objections and get through the sales cycle faster. And that goes with the buy. When they do that, they need to capture those expectations so that when it's implemented, they implement correctly for that customer's expectations and for what they're trying to achieve in their outcomes. And then, of course, adoption comes easier as the cycle continues. And then, of course, that also impacts your renewals, your optimization there. I'm going to leave alone because for a lot of companies that is so far out, we don't even want to talk about that. But that means when they're really using your suite of products or services to the fullest extent for their company. But regardless, you're going to impact renew, grow, and offboard as well with value realization. Your renewals are going to become quicker, the growth is going to become quicker, and then the offboarding will become less imperative because hopefully you're keeping more customers. So what does a value methodology or progression really look like? And in my experience, this is a perfect representation of it. So you have value discovery, and obviously this is time and complexity go on to show you how much harder it gets as this process continues. With value discovery, you're looking at everything around the customer, what makes them really tick? What are those metrics that they're looking for to achieve by buying your product or service? This is the part that most people haven't even gotten to, right? So I would say where you see that kind of gray star, this is where most companies are today, including the ones that I used to work for. And I put 2 other stars here so that you can see one of the companies I got to the value defined, and we were working through all of the different ways that we could bring value to a customer, and we were presenting it to them. In another company I worked for, we got all the way to value engineered, and we were actually creating that value consulting engagement for customers to bring even more revenue on board. And so you can see this is a serious, it is a serious progression. It takes often a little bit longer than I'd like to admit, but the return is really what gets you. So what I mean by that is if we're looking at some value realization in the wild, I picked a PE firm, for example, just to show you guys how a PE firm even thinks about their suite of companies and what they need from them as they're trying to achieve all the profitable impact that they can for this PE firm. So within this PE firm, 93% of the revenue is recurring in their portfolio of companies, 93% recurring revenue. 65% of that comes from existing customers. And this is in their high performing customers portfolio. So it's a little bit of a segment, a subset, if you will. And then this is one that I think we always forget, but 70% of a prospect's education is done prior to their first interaction with you. So if you aren't setting the expectation that they're going to get value from you in the marketing, how are they ever going to know that before they get to you? They might not even make it to you. So this is why value realization is very important and why marketing and sales and support, everybody has to be talking the same talk and walking the same walk. The difference between value discovery and value defined is value discovery is when you're starting to sort it out. You're maybe doing one-pagers to show customers the value to test it. That's your first phase, right? You're kind of thinking about all the different ways that you impact the customer, and you're starting to build out the content. Value defined is when you have it defined and you're ready to go to customers with like a full business review, full of the value that you can provide them. Again, this is a really deep and tedious topic to kind of dig into, and I'm trying to give you the most that I can today. So I'll show you some more examples of this. And then again, value defined leads into the value engineering. Sorry about that, Ivan. I just saw your note.
And Marja, can you tell us, to give us the same definition at the high level of value engineered?
Yeah, value engineered is when you're actually going into a customer and you're saying, we're going to look at this engagement from a very broad perspective. We're going to talk to everybody in your company that could or would be impacted by our product and service. And I don't mean literally everybody. It's probably 20 to 30 interviews that on average. And then what you do is the value consultants will compile a list of what could be done programmatically within processes and then with the products and services that they provide to impact that value. And then all of that is built into an engagement summary, if you will, to say if you go buy these things and execute on these to-dos, right? Changing your program, changing your processes, you will see this value of return. And so sometimes it's you know, a lot, sometimes it's a medium amount, but what we're always seeing is that there's probably 20% to 25% more out of customers that we can get than we are today. And that's just a simple metric. But so the value engineered is really important because that's when you are mature. You have to be a pretty mature organization, and your data and your consultants have to be pretty mature in this space as well to get to that. But hopefully that answers the question, Jeff.
And then I imagine you must have to have relationships with some more senior level people in that organization, because the original people who brought you in may have had a few points of value that they were looking to get out of it, which may just be scratching the surface of the total value that your solution can deliver. And it may be beyond their purview to explore some of these other areas. So I don't want to get ahead because I know you're going to talk about some of the challenges, but that's just a challenge that I see a lot of my clients encountering, when trying to get up that maturity model.
Yes, it's not an easy thing to get up, and it's definitely one of those like climbs that you're doing incrementally. So don't be afraid if you're in that spot where the star is at the bottom. That's where most people are. So so this is just another example of where we're seeing value realization in the wild. There are two companies from this PE firm actually that I'm going to share with what their results were because of all this, because the PE firm kind of guided them along the way. Their logo retention, the first one is a software provider, and it's financial for finance companies. Their logo retention went up 11 points. Their NPS score was 9.2, and their gross retention rate also shot up 10 points. For company number two, who's also a software provider, they're faster. They increased they sped up, right, in a good way, the time to value or adoption for their customers. There was a reduction of 29% in the next growth purchase. So think about that expand, right? You're making that happen quicker. So you're having faster sales cycles 3 times for this company. And then there was a 74% increase in the next expand purchase. And that's pretty huge, right? So these are some pretty great metrics to see from companies who are in that they're probably in that value defined space, okay? Now, let's move on to what it looks like if you're in the value engineered space. So this company is a SaaS company, one of the first. They had 99% market share at the time and 99.5 logo retention. For their value engineering, so their value engagements that they did with customers, 83% were closed won. $286,000 was the average suggested annual recurring revenue that was added to their portfolio. So when they went in with a recommendation, they said, in order to achieve all of this, you need to spend an additional $286,000. Okay, so that was the average that went into the proposals. $151,000 was the average closed per customer. Now, the total customer engagements over this period was 24 months, and there were 90 engagements. There were 3.5 consultants that did this. Out of this, over the 24 months, the revenue was $23.5 million. That's almost $1 million a month being brought back in from existing customers due to these engagements. So you can see that this is extremely impactful if you can get to that point. But even if you don't, you're still going to really push your sales cycles. You're going to push your growth. So what's at risk?
And can I just ask, Marja, in that case, were those value engagement consulting sessions also billable to the clients? Did they pay for those, or was that
They did
something that
not.
they did not? Okay, so that was part of the service provided to the customers, part of their subscription.
Yep,
Okay.
absolutely. So you had to, in this situation, you had to be nominated, because there were so many customers, right? You can't just go do this for every customer, especially when you only have 3 to 4 value consultants at one point. So they had to be nominated, and there had to be enough opportunity for them to go and do that.
Yep.
Just because, it needed to be worth our time or their time, if you will. So yes, yeah, there was definitely a process, but it doesn't mean that they kind of cherry picked, if we're being honest, because you had to at that point. We didn't have enough scale to do every customer. Imagine if you did. All right, so what are some of the risks? This one, I think everybody should really pay attention to, is that 30% of current work hours across the US economy are going to be automated with generative AI by the year 2030. This is really a white collar reckoning, is what they're calling it, because they're using automation now to complete junior level tasks, and they anticipate that to grow. Excuse me. Which is also allowing a focus on that more strategic work that needs to be done in order to get your customers to the place where they can expand for you. So this means that we need to really, really pay attention when we're talking about demand for efficiency and tech stack consolidation. This is going to happen internally with your organizations, and it's going to happen externally. How are you going to kind of pull everything together, make sure your tools are working better? And that might happen to you internally. So that's also something to be aware of. Even though this is external risks, it happens on both sides. And then, of course, there's this convergence in software pricing, and buyers are becoming more and more aware and informed. So you're going to have to defend your pricing, which means value realization really is your best friend in this situation. And then there are some other things that are coming up, like premium capabilities, support. I'm going to highlight this one, and risk are paramount to pricing going forward. What kind of support you provide, I went forward, is becoming more and more critical. I'm seeing some of the biggest tech companies call even their support center customer centric, customer obsessed, because it's that important going forward. All right, what are some of the internal risks?
So Marja, let me just ask you there too, on the external risks, that white collar reckoning, that could also be an opportunity, right?
It can, and we'll talk about that for sure.
Oh, yeah. You will, okay, because
yeah.
I just look at that as, especially if your solution provides some of those AI capabilities that help automate the more junior tasks, now you can be talking to your customers about the more strategic things that they can be doing, and they'll actually have time to think about it versus, oh, I can't do that, I'm too busy with this or that, right?
Yeah,
Which is
absolutely.
what I hear a lot. Okay.
Yeah, it's going to require a lot of retooling and reskilling, right? Because a lot of people don't have that generative AI capability today. They might think that they're doing really great at it, but there's a lot of ways that you can get skilled in that so that you are making the most of your time using it, right? Yeah, so those internal risks. This one is definitely going to hit home for everybody, and you're probably saying, why am I saying value is an internal risk? I'm talking about the value of the customer success role, and the value of changing course. All of those things are up in the air at companies at times. Can the customer success team show value? We're going to talk about data. This is a slippery slope if you don't know what you're doing. And it's probably one of the most important parts of this entire presentation. And I'm obsessed with data, so I'm going to tell you that it absolutely is integral to all of this. And then, of course, AI. So here you're going to see a lot of text. I've highlighted in white what I'm going to kind of touch on. As far as the maturity of your organization, if you aren't doing data collection correctly, you're not going to be able to understand how to show your value back to your organization, right? And this is as far as value goes. There's also the CS tool versus the sales tools. That's also a big one. How are you going to separate those two, combine those two? How are they going to talk? in your organization, if you're thinking about sales versus customer success, there's often a line there that is blurred, and sometimes even a little bit combative on who owns what. So you need to make sure that you have all of your ducks in a row and you're all buttoned up as far as what that looks like. So a RACI is important here. As far as alignment, do your team KPIs align with your org KPIs? Are you looking at your org KPIs and then building yours based on that? Because that's the way that you really need to tie everything back. As simple as that sounds, a lot of companies aren't doing that. They're kind of just building KPIs that are irrelevant to the whole organization, right? Just because you had 85 business reviews this month, what does that mean? That doesn't mean anything to anybody. You need to be a little bit more transparent in how that affects the bottom line. And then, of course, if you're not focused on the customer, you're not going to see the collection of success stories, and that isn't going to be seen as valuable. So your organization isn't doing it. So that's also an uphill battle you're going to have to fight. As far as data goes, the biggest one here I'm going to talk about is unclear requirements. A lot of people don't know what kind of data to collect, how to collect it, what it should look like, how it should be parsed, how it should be brought out of the system or the data lake that you're using. So making sure that you kind of get a good grasp on that and how you're going to use the data is really important. Governance, as far as your organization goes, you need to make sure that you have good governance. This means, are you taking care of your customers' data? Are you making sure that they're not able to be determined anything from any benchmarks that you have? So you need to build cohorts for that. How big does your cohort need to be depending on your legal department? All of those things need governance, and you need to make sure that you're following all the rules and you're keeping your customer data safe, especially if you have it on multiple continents. A lot of EMEA customers are going to be very reticent to let you keep their data in America or even other countries. So you're going to have to be very diligent about how that works for your customers. Tool utilization and data collection, I realize that we're kind of running behind here, so I'm going to speed up a little bit. Those are really important. What tools you're using and what data you're collecting. You've got to be diligent about that. And then as far as AI goes, the perception of utilization benefits, that is definitely not something that you want to ignore. What can you do to make sure that the perception isn't there, that using that is going to be easier than using your teams? There's a lot of upskilling that needs done. It requires a shift in people getting educated on it and skilled up. And then make sure you're aligned on people over process and where in the customer lifecycle AI actually makes sense. A lot of times it is not in the customer X roles. So that's something that you really need to be cognizant of. And these are some example obstacles in the life cycle that you're going to see. In aware, marketing is not aligned to the business outcome. So they're not really learning the true value of your company before they make a decision to even consider you. Then again, the sales pitches won't be aligned with customers trying to achieve those outcomes, and or they're bundling your stuff. So they don't even know they have it and they don't know the use of it. Once they buy, what are those customer expectations and goals? Are they captured thoroughly? Probably not. And if they're not, then implementation is not going to align to the customer outcomes or their goals. So the implementation may be wrong. And then adoption, what does that even look like? What is adoption to you? Do you have that defined? And if there's not a big engagement from your customers because they don't understand the value or you don't really understand the benefits, what are you going to do from there? And then optimizing isn't going to happen because there are no expectations there. And then it results in longer renewal cycles, reduced spend, there's no budget to grow, lack of evidence to have them invest further. And then if they offboard, your CAC increases, the customer acquisition cost. If you have to earn back their trust through product or service improvements, that's going to take you longer. And then that sales cycle increases once again. So how do we change the challenge into opportunity? First, there is a growing expectation on software companies to really start up the way that they need to in order to be successful as they grow, and that is starting value realization from the beginning. So collect data early and often, no matter what stage you're at. recognizing the current limits of AI, refute the assumption that it has to be customer X roles that are impacted. Why aren't you using it for proposals? Why aren't you using it for marketing content? Why aren't you using it for a plethora of things that aren't actually the customer X roles? Because those are the ones where personal touch really matters. And then finally, there's a rise of SaaS to serve blue collar professions. I realize that not everybody is going to retool to go service these blue collar professions, but what I'm telling you is there are opportunities for untapped markets. And so the more value realization, the more money coming into your organization means you have the ability to innovate. And that could be a number of things. This is just an example to say expansion is out there, innovate, but you need the money to do so.
And Marja,
So,
on the
yeah.
data front,
Mhm.
because I mean, I know how much you love data and you believe it's really the starting point for this whole process, right, of value
It is.
realization. But for the people in our audience, could you just give us a couple of examples of the type of customer data that you're recommending there that they need to gather and have their hands around? And I know a lot of it might vary by what the value outcomes are that are possible with your solution or things like that. But even if you could just give an example, like from your past, I just want to make sure people understand the type of data you're talking about.
Yeah, it can be anything from how many times they log in to how many times they perform a specific action to what they say to you in a call that you're having with them when they're frustrated. Even if it's not specific metrics, those
Yep.
frustration points, all of that is still data, right? And it tells you where their frustrations are and where you need to meet them to help relieve some of those frustrations. It could be a support issue. It could be that they don't know how to use your product properly. They weren't implemented. They weren't educated, right? So you need to look at all data points, not just the actual metrics, capture even the non-data, the non-numerical stuff. You need to
Right.
capture everything. I do have an example in here to show you of a way to show
Okay.
value. And so hopefully,
But is it fair to say at this point, though, that the data, the heart of the data, is really around like qualitative and quantitative measures of the value that the customer is experiencing, which is the
yes,
value that you are delivering, which what you're claiming is that a lot of companies don't even have that. They don't even have they haven't even identified what what that should be, let alone collecting the actual data against those measures.
yes. It's
Okay.
very hard to do because you have to have, I mean, I can tell you that I went through this process and I did it, I don't want to say on my own, because I obviously had to partner with people to understand all of the different impacts, but I was working kind of by myself as a one-person show. And it took me probably a year to get to the point where I was ready to collect the data. Because
Wow.
there's so much that, and again, I was one person with a full-time job trying to do this on top of it. So, that could be kind of condensed down to 3 to 6 months if you're working diligently on it, or if you're having someone help you from outside so that you get some, um, assistance while you're doing your day job, because it's not easy to do it all at once, right? Um, so strategies for success, again, organizational alignment. Make sure you have alignment on the KPIs for your roles. Align on what customer KPIs. Again, this is hard, so don't expect it to be magic. And then look at business data for opportunities. And the one thing I want to say about this is I looked at one of our products at one point and I was like, we have a problem here. We're having a lot of attrition, right? A lot of people are getting rid of this. And then a lot of people aren't using it, but they have it. Why? Investigate those things. Those are paramount to you proving value, because again, it could be bundling. It could be they don't know the benefits of it, so they don't want to use it. They didn't get educated properly at the start of all this. So how are they going to use it to their benefit? And then if you're looking for that example on customer KPIs, here's a really good one. Um, let's say that you provide software for single sign-on. Okay. 2,000 support calls for password resets were avoided. We know that accounts for probably $40,000 savings in one day. Year-to-date savings, 2.8 million. Lifetime savings, 12.4 million. This is how you get to those metrics. What are the pain points that are causing the customer issues? If they're having to answer the password calls, 2,000 of them avoided, right? That is absolutely something you can attach to money. Those are people's hours, right? How many hours of people is that taking up? So there's something that I always try to do, and I'll get to this on the next slide, but there are 4 things that you need to talk to when it comes to reaching that C level. Before we get through here, I just want to say you do need to align on the customer journey and the life cycle and the roles and responsibilities of everybody in the customer life cycle so that you have a really good RACI going forward and you have delineation in your roles. If we're thinking about the critical customer kind of junctions, here you definitely need to make sure that you are sharing your success, the customer success with marketing for use in campaigns. Definitely make sure that expectations are set and captured in your tools. In the handoff process from buy to implement, it is imperative that that customer's outcomes are captured, what they are trying to achieve. And then make sure that that customer education or even your end user education is not overlooked. That is also critical. They can't adopt if they don't know how. And then adoption, there's a whole bunch of stuff here, but basically you really need to kind of buckle down on what it means to have a customer success process and what that looks like and what your operations are. So here, when we're talking about buy to implement, again, make sure that the customer expectations are captured and that there are opportunities for increased adoption through education. And don't forget your end users. Finally, early and ongoing action. And this is the one where you're going to hear my 4 major themes: money, people, risk, and time. Those are the 4 things that the C-suite cares about if you just boil it down. Okay. So if you want to talk to that level, which is very important in getting value realization up the chain so that they sign again on the order, 4 major themes. By using that, you can actually take your day-to-day contact and make them a hero. That gives them the ability to talk up to their senior leadership and continue to elevate the value realization that's happening. And that's how you get into those higher roles at companies. Again, that content has to be relevant to those higher levels: time, people, money, risk. And listen when they talk. This is another big one. Don't always tell your customer, listen. Listen to what they say, especially the executives, because they're going to tell you something, even if it doesn't seem like it. And then if you don't have value realization built out, maybe try an executive briefing to at least get those C-suites engaged, right? Have your product people come in to talk to them, bring them into the office, make a day of it. If you don't know how to do an executive briefing, let me know. I'll help you build an outline for it. It's actually one of the biggest tools to get those executives engaged and then to continue that engagement, especially if you don't have a value realization program today. So leveraging your customers, trying to get through these here, determine what compels them and what brings them back. So again, if you're trying to start from the beginning, do a win story review. Did it capture, first of all, did it capture the full sentiment? If not, make sure that they're doing that on the back end, right? Go back and say, hey, sales, you need to capture this better. Do you need supplemental information? And then interview those VIP customers that you have. Leverage your advisory boards. Ask questions in QBRs to understand why. Why did you pick us? What was the selling point? And then take all of those reasons that you get, align them into themes. Those will be your value pillars. Okay, those are going to be the themes under which you go to, right? So maybe it's global compliance and business continuity. That could be one of them, right? To make sure that you're compliant and you can continue your business. That is something everybody needs. So that would be a value pillar. And then understand and identify the value drivers within those themes that align to your product or service. And then that's how you start to build out the data that goes with it. So an example of that would be, if we're talking about global compliance and business continuity, one of them would be probably, federal regulations, right? That would be a huge one, especially if you're pharma, if you're finance, those kinds of things. All right, number 2 on leveraging your customers. identify the data required to illustrate. Again, this is hard. You got to work through those things, listen to your customers, listen to the needs of your product, and then work with your BI team to extract those metrics in a usable source. Also, iterate. This is not a once and done. When you add a feature, when you add a function, iterate. You're not done. Value realization keeps going. As your product keeps innovating, so do you. Everything needs updated. And then finally, use your customers as your sounding board for proof points. So test your hypothesis of data with some trusted customers. Work with your data team then to refine that for feedback, and iterate, 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 iterate. Maybe you don't do a whole value realization. You take them one by one. You know, anything you've got is better than nothing. So in conclusion, data. You need data. Again, quantitative and qualitative. Listen to your customer. They're going to tell you their pain points. If any of you do Sandler or have been trained in Sandler, that is really that whole identifying the pain. That's the important part. Get alignment within your organization. Talk to your C-suite. Make sure that they understand the value of your organization as a customer X role and bring that to the forefront. Bring them data. So back to the data, right? How are we being impactful? And then iteration is required. This is not a once and done process. As your product or your service evolves, so does value realization, because there are going to be new ways to kind of bring that value to your customers. And that is it.
All right. Well, if anybody does have any questions, we're a small enough group. You just feel free to come off mute and ask your questions of Marja. But Marja, I have a couple that I'm going to start just before we see if anybody has any as well. I want to go back to one of the things I pointed out earlier. You know, when you're going from that up the curve there from value discovery to value defined to value engineered, I mentioned earlier the obstacle that sometimes the initial people that you are working with may not be the people that are the ones that are going to help you or let you help them, you know, achieve the more advanced value outcomes that you know that your software can deliver, because maybe there's other teams that have to get involved. And so how do you manage a challenge like that, where that's really even holding your CSMs back from fully getting access to the right people, or maybe the value that your solution delivers is exponential depending on the number of functions that are involved, right, or departments that get involved, right? How do you help them realize that they're going to get more value, their organization will get more value, even especially when this goes beyond what they're being held accountable for from day to day? Does that make sense?
It does. It does. So I'm going to use my time at SAP Concur as an example. Here, we had travel managers, and then you had accounting. Those things they're not in the same group. They don't report to the same people, right? And then on top of that, you also have your risk officer or your security officer who is in charge of the people, because when they're traveling, there's a duty of care risk, right? How do you get travel managers and accounting to talk? I mean, why would they? One's spending money, one's like, quit spending money, right? Like diametrically opposed people, and it's kind of like a joke, right? But because they benefit each other. The more you do here to improve your accounting, the better travel program you can have. Maybe you get more bonuses, different kinds of hotels, because you're managing the money better. There are two different sets of people who have to be successful in that situation. Bringing them both to the table at the same time is important, because you want to show them how working symbiotically can actually exponentially, like you said, help them in the end, right?
Right.
How do you get those people in the same room? Well, that's hard. That's never easy, right? Especially when it's like, well, that's a whole different thing. I don't need to be in that presentation. You're going to be talking about accounting. I don't want to hear it. Don't make it about either. Say, I want to present to you guys how you're using our product today. I want to talk to you about how you can use it in the future to be more efficient, to be better connected internally so that you guys have the best tool for all teams, and so that you're being the hero to, again, make them your hero. I like to go back to a little story. We all, and now I'm going to forget his name because, of course, Sir Edmund Hillary, I think it is, the first one to climb Mount
Everest.
Everest.
Yes,
Yeah.
you're
Does
right. You got
anybody
it.
remember? He's the first one to climb it, but does anybody know the name of his Sherpa? The one that actually made it possible for that man to climb Everest was a Sherpa. He didn't do it by himself, right? That Sherpa is customer X. How are you going to Sherpa the load of everything you need to do to get them to the top of the mountain? Those contacts that are day to day that may just be a manager, they're not going to make the buying decision. Make them a hero. Help them climb Everest. Give them everything you can to make them shine within their organization. And then they're going to want to share it with everybody. That is the biggest thing that I can say is like, if you want to get a champion, you got to make them a champion. They aren't
Right.
just going to do it.
Right.
So,
And I imagine you would say too that ideally you're actually educating them in their buying process on these potential outcomes that they could have, as
yep,
well as trying to get them to bring those other parties in. Like if you're selling to travel and you need accounting involved to really get the value of an expense
yep,
reimbursement system or vice versa,
yep,
I imagine you want to get that in their buying process. You want to get them to realize that, right? But then of
absolutely.
course there's going to be the natural inclination of sales reps to I just want to get the deal done. I don't want to raise any new objections or anything like that. And so how important do you think it is to actually be establishing that, pre-sales? Because I know you talked a lot about how it starts on that adopt phase in terms of
It does.
defining it,
Right.
but in the life cycle of a customer, it's important that you bring them in. I mean, that you attract them in your marketing right around the potential value outcomes they can achieve, and then get them bought into that in the sales process,
Yep.
right? So that the expectations get set.
Yeah, this is why you take everything back from that adoption point. You
Right.
take all of those learnings and you feed it to marketing, you feed it to sales. And I know that sales is going to be like, I don't want to listen, but if you tell them more money, faster, more money, faster. That's what happens if you use value realization and you talk the talk and walk the walk through the entire customer life cycle. And we actually, I have done this. We have done this. It's not impossible. And it was done at a large organization. So don't think that this is like moving mountains. We're not moving Everest. We're trying to climb Everest, right? Um, so yeah, I think getting everybody on the same board, which it means that your leadership has to be bought in. So you need to help educate them on what the benefits are and how that's actually going to help them in the long term. And again, you can do little things in the meantime that start to lead to that value realization. Pick one value driver. Start with that. Have a one page about it, right? Like back to that support calls. Build that into a one pager. Find the data that supports it and iterate on that. Deliver it to your customers. See how they feel about it, right? You don't have to bite off more than you can chew, but you definitely need to start those little things so you can feed them back to marketing. And if you have a customer advocacy program, they are your best friends. Sit next to them, hug them, buy them wine and chocolates. I don't know, but you definitely have, if you have that org, make sure that you are treating them with, all the love and compassion you can because they're trying to get customer stories back for you. And that's where the rubber meets the road.
And that's a great point too, because a lot of the people that are going to be listening to this broadcast are customer advocacy professionals or customer marketing professionals themselves.
Mhm.
And so that also raises the good point about capturing the value stories, because in my experience with the sales reps, if you try to go to the sales reps with your value pillar cheat sheet or discussion guide or something like that, they don't want to hear what the people inside your company claim, because it's going to be full of your marketing speak and buzzwords, probably for the most part. But if
Yep.
it's in the customer's voice, in the customer's language, using the customer's terminology, then you can't claim that it's just all marketing buzzwords and things like that. And my
Yeah.
experience has been that the sales teams will latch onto that much more, especially if you're sharing with them, or if you're capturing these value stories that's in the customer's voice, in that first person, in their language, in their
In
terms.
their
Because
language. Yep.
yeah, because sales reps, I mean, they tend to assume everything that comes from marketing is marketing speak, but in this case, it's not, at
It's
least in
not.
my experience.
No.
Yeah,
Yeah. And one of the other things to consider is, you know, maybe you don't, I'm not saying partner with sales, but if you have technical sales folks, like if you're a technology company and you have some SMEs that are really good at that tech, that are pre-sales, not your just AE, um, partner with them, because a lot of times those are the people that actually have to show the customer how it's going to be valuable in the sales cycle. And so they'll know in their head how to articulate those things some ways, or how the customer articulates them, and then how they go show and prove to them that it's going to work. Those people are a really great source for you. Anybody that's a SME on the product that is not
yeah,
necessarily the product creator, you need someone that's like talking about it every day, that's seeing it in action every day. So, maybe a solutions consultant, something like that, if you have those. Those are really good people to talk to. I do that every time I build a value realization methodology, is I talk to the pre-sales folks, and your technical SMEs, because those are the people who are going to actually have to execute on some of this stuff to prove it out to customers.
right. And you started to talk about like a first step that you could take, like even just picking one value pillar. Can
Yeah.
you tell us a little bit more about how that could play out? So somebody that's not the CEO, that needs to be convinced to drive this, how can somebody, from the middle out, start, pick a value driver and start to influence their peers around embracing value realization and the definition of value outcomes and things like that? Just pragmatically, can you describe
Yeah.
some things that they could do off the bat?
Um, okay, let's say, for example, you have one product and that product is seeing attrition, right? The retention is dwindling. People aren't using it. Go look at that data, right? What are all the aspects of that product or service that need to be adopted, right? So your features and your functionality. I hate to talk about these because then you're going to think, oh, that's what I'm selling. You're not selling the features and the functionality. Get away from the nerd knobs, okay? You really want to talk about what the value is that those features and functionality bring. So maybe start there. So maybe start with, okay, if you adopt this feature, it does this for you. What does that look like for a customer? How does that fit in time, people, risk, or money, right? Where does that fit? What are you providing them back, right? Are you providing them a savings, time saving? Their employees are happier because their jobs are easier, right? These are important things to a C-suite, because if their employees aren't happy, then they're going to have churn in their employees, and that's also a cost. So having happy employees is important, especially at a highly skilled organization. So look at those things, look at those features and those functions of that product or service and say, where can I pick out little things to quantify value for customers, right? Maybe, again, it's something like, uh, I'm trying to think of like those support calls, right? Like, oh, well, we didn't have support calls, so you saved a bunch of money, right? You weren't experiencing that. And also, here's another little tidbit. Don't always assume that the data is going to come from you. Sometimes you're going to have to get it from your customer, to prove it out, right? You don't have their operational metrics. So sometimes you're either going to have to estimate based on either, like, if you're saying, oh, I saved you this many hours in your people's work, and you need to quantify that, you can use like Glassdoor for an estimate, right? And say, of course, this is an estimate. You can go recreate this formula with your actual costs of the headcount. So think about that you're not always going to be exact because you don't have their metrics, you don't have their data for operations, right? So you're going to have to estimate some of that stuff. Um, but yeah, hopefully that
But
helps. a little bit.
And yeah, related to that point too, I would imagine if your product was at least gathering either from historical transactions or activities or whatever,
Mhm.
the raw material or the components of a calculation of value, it seems to me that's all the better. That would be part of the innovation side, I would imagine, of
Yes.
value realization, right? Is to be able to architect that right into your product.
Yes, absolutely. A lot of times products aren't even implemented to collect the data you need out of them. So that's another thing you really got to consider is, does your product team know that you need this data and how are you going to get it out? It's not
Yeah.
always just going to be in your data lake. Don't think that data exists just to exist. It has to be instrumented to do so. So you may have to go through the grueling process of getting your product instrumented to get the data out that you need.
Right. But it just seems like that's so critical, especially in SaaS, that
It is.
products be able to uh, you know, measure the activity that's going on in the usage of that product that then could be used with some either like models, financial models for
Yeah.
projecting what does that mean based on average costs for doing things or efficiencies that can be gained. So yeah, that's a very interesting point. Well, well, Marja, why don't we break here? I really appreciate it. This is
Absolutely.
fantastic, and really looking forward to having our audience absorb all of these concepts.
Yeah.
And thanks again for really leading the charge on such an important area for all of us to be really becoming experts in.
Happy to. Thank you for having me. Thank
All
you for
right,
sure, Jeff. Yeah.
and thank you everybody for joining us today. Have a great rest of your day. Bye bye.
Bye all.